Uh, Judas, it says Iscariot. Iscariot means he was from the town of Kerioth. And I mean, it's, you know, we talk about people that live in infamy. This is a guy that lives in infamy, right? This one act of betrayal. Perhaps it was because, well, there was always evil in his heart. It was just taking time to express itself in this way. Jesus said in one place, "Haven't I chosen you, and one of you's a devil. One of you's an adversary of mine. But I chose you." And so it was always there with Judas. There was always something wrong. As I mentioned a moment ago, the gospel writer said he didn't care about the poor. He said Judas was about holding the bag. He was the treasurer, and he wanted the money in the bag so he could, you know, he could handle that money and have that money. And that greed got a hold of him. I don't know what, well, the Bible talks about Satan entered into his heart at that moment to go and do what he was going to do. And he goes to the chief priests knowing they want Jesus. And he makes a deal with them, the Bible says, for 30 pieces of silver. And I read somewhere one time where 30 pieces of silver was the common price for a slave. So it was almost like they chose that amount because of their disdain or disgust for Jesus. We're going to give 30 pieces. We'll give you 30 pieces of silver for it. And you know, when the devil gets a hold of somebody's mind, like it got, you know, Judas went so far, and then you give yourself over to the enemy, then the enemy takes you further than you intended to go. And you see this when Judas later on seems to regret what he's done. I don't know what was in Judas's mind. There's a lot of people that conjecture about that. I really don't know. I don't think there was any good intent in anything he did about it. But he was finding a way. Now remember, they're trying to craftily find a way. Now they've found a guy, okay, here's one of his disciples. He can tell us where we can get him and find him alone, away from the people. This guy knows his habits. This guy can tell us, we can get him. And so they were glad to hear from Judas and to be able to have somebody who could lead them straight to where Jesus would be found. And so it says, in the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, talking about the Passover lamb, his disciple, and what it's saying is, it's saying that the first day of unleavened bread was approaching, the first day of the feast of Passover, and that was the day they killed the Passover lamb, and everybody was supposed to eat the Passover meal. So it wasn't saying that day was there. What it was saying is that day was coming, the first day when the Passover was killed. His disciples said to him, "Where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou must eat the Passover?" One of the reasons why we know that is the Greek wording of it is saying it's approaching. But also because if it would have been actually the day of Passover, they couldn't have prepared the meal because it was a Sabbath. It was a special Sabbath, so they couldn't work on the Sabbath. So they were approaching the day. You had to make your preparations before the day finally came. And so here they were in Jerusalem. They knew they needed to celebrate the Passover. His disciples said to him, "Where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover?" When we look at this, and I've spent the last couple of days, every time I get to this part of Scripture, I start having to sit down and write things out. And you almost need a computer to figure some of these dates out. Because it talks about, like for instance, it said it's 2 days before the first day of unleavened bread, the day of Passover. And then it starts talking about day of preparation. It talks about Sabbaths. What day was Jesus actually crucified on? All of these things are, man, they're hard to figure out because you have to take in all four accounts because all of them talk about the events that took place. And then you had 2 Sabbaths and 2 days of preparation. So when it talks about it was the day of preparation, was it the day of preparation for the regular Saturday Sabbath? You know, the day before, from 6 o'clock on Thursday night to 6 o'clock on Friday night, it was always the day of preparation. get everything ready, get everything done, because at 6 o'clock on Friday to 6 o'clock in the evening on Saturday, you couldn't do any work. And so it was called the Day of Preparation. Well, the Passover was also a special Sabbath. It may not be on Saturday. In fact, this one wasn't. It wasn't on a Saturday. But that day was still a Sabbath. So the day before that day was a day of preparation. So when you try and bring all of these factors together, and it talks about then was the day of preparation, does it mean that was the day of preparation? Or like we just said a moment ago, does it mean the day of preparation was approaching like it does here? And so all these things make it difficult for us to pinpoint the time that Jesus was actually crucified. You know, I look back on, I wrote Matthew's, the verse by verse on Matthew several years back, and then Luke more recently, and now Mark. And I noticed that I change just about every time that I write it out, because it's very confusing as to what the timing was. Because you look at the Bible and it says, for instance, Jesus will be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Well, if Jesus was crucified on Friday, he wasn't in the grave 3 nights. So we have Good Friday as the day that we celebrate or commemorate the day that Jesus died on the cross. But if Jesus died on a Friday, he had only been in there Friday and Saturday night. He wouldn't have been in there 3 nights. So how do you reconcile that? Well, then he must have died on a day different than Friday. He must have died at least on Thursday. Then you have to look back and look at Scripture or look at history and find out what day did Passover fall on during the time that Pilate was reigning as the governor. So all of these things, factors come into effect. And so we don't know if it was Wednesday, we don't know if it was Thursday, we don't know exactly what day it was. So all we know is that the Passover was there. It was time for the Passover. They had to get the Passover together. Wherewithal we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover. And he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and saith to them, Go ye into the city, talking about Jerusalem, and there ye shall meet a man bearing a pitcher of water, follow him. Well, you know, when we think of a pitcher, we're thinking of a Kool-Aid pitcher, you know. We're just thinking of a tea pitcher. But they're talking about one of these big vessels. You know, you go to get water at the pool or the well, you're not going down there for just a pitcher of water. And it's obvious the man who's going down to get the water was probably a servant in a rather large household. So it was probably one of these you see sometimes in movies or on TV where they have these big earthen pots. About what you would imagine at the when Jesus turned the water into wine. You know, big earthen vessels, and he's carrying this pot full of water. So he said, you're going into town, you're going to see a man, he's going to be carrying a pitcher of water. Isn't it amazing how Jesus knows exactly where people are going to be, exactly what they're going to be doing at what time they're going to be doing it. It's amazing that he knows all of these facts about people's lives and about time. So he sends forth 2 of his disciples, saying to them, Go into the city, Jerusalem, and there you shall meet a man bearing a pitcher of water, follow him. And wheresoever he shall go in, say ye to the good man of the house, The master saith, Where is the great guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? So Jesus knew that the man that was bearing the water was going to take them to a house that was a rather large house. The reason why we know the man must have been rich is he had a pretty large guest chamber in his house. You know, I mean, I don't think that's normal for somebody to have a guest chamber. What it's talking about, well, it goes on to talk about it was an upper room, so it's a second floor of a house, and that whole area is like an open room, and it was big enough to accommodate 13 people to sit down and eat. And so it was a pretty good size room. So he says, wheresoever you should go, say to the good man of the house. The good man of the house is just saying the master of the house or the one who owns the house. The man bearing the pitcher then obviously was not the owner of the house. When you get there, say to the good man of the house, the master saith, the teacher saith. And that's such a strange thing. That's a conversation that we could have. Teachers and masters, there was a connection there. I've mentioned to you before, if you wanted to learn a trade from somebody, you became their apprentice, but when you became their apprentice to learn their trade, for them to teach you that, for instance, blacksmithing at that time, if you wanted them to teach you that, that was a valuable skill to learn because you could make money off that. Well, I'm not going to just give you that. If you want to learn, then you come and I'll not only teach you, but while I'm teaching you, you're going to do all the grunt work. You know, you're going to do all the stuff that nobody else wants to do. You're going to pick up the trash. You're going to go gather the materials to burn in the fire. You're going to do all these things. And so if somebody wanted to learn something from somebody and they were their teacher, they would sit at their feet and the master would sit in a higher place and then they would teach them. And so the idea of me just getting up here and teaching you is a different concept than what they had. Because there was a connection between teaching and being over you, right? Being the master over somebody. And so a lot of these things when we talk about women in ministry, there's a connection there that we have to be careful of because God set a divine order of the man's the head of the wife. And then how does that translate into a woman becoming a teacher when in the Bible times a teacher was equivalent with becoming the master and then you became their servant. So you could see how you could turn that over on the idea of what it meant to be the gender roles that God has established. So that's why there's been a lot of discussion in Christianity about that. We don't see teaching exactly the same way as what we do is not exactly the same. That's a discussion for a different time. But anyway, when he says master, it's obvious that the guy knows who he's talking about. And Jesus knows that the guy's going to know who he's talking about. The master saith, where is the guest chamber where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. So the idea was that, you know, it would seem like this guy had set up this guest chamber in the upper room of his house, and he had set it all out. Now see, they didn't sit around tables like we said. Sometimes you see Lord's Supper paintings, you know, of people sitting at a table or something, and they didn't sit at tables. They sat on cushions on the floor, and they would lean toward one side, and they would eat with one arm down, and then they would eat their food while they were leaning on that. Well, this guy had already set out the cushions, had already made preparations, and there's a message there. Brother Harvey, you can preach that sometime. Guess who's coming to dinner? Because the guy somehow had set up this chamber for somebody to come, and it was obvious he didn't really have an understanding of who was coming, but God said, make the chamber ready. And when they came, they said, where's the guest chamber that my master? Oh, it's upstairs. And they said when they went there, it was already laid out, already ready for them. And so everything was, as far as that part was ready for them and prepared. But Jesus said not only that, but he said, it says in verse 16, his disciples went forth and came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. So they came to the city, they found the man, they followed him back to the house, they asked the master of the house, they said the master is coming, and where's the guest chamber that he and his disciples his students can eat the Passover? And he showed them a large upper room that was already set out. Now, that didn't mean that they didn't have to go out and buy the unleavened bread. It didn't mean that they didn't have to go out and get the lamb and prepare the lamb. So all of this had to take place before Jesus and the disciples came. So in verse 17 it says, and in the evening he cometh with the 12. Literally, in the evening Jesus resorted to this place with his disciples. So it's now coming toward dusk. The way that the Passover worked, the lamb was killed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then you ate the dinner that evening. And so the Passover's been killed, they come to eat it. This is another thing that goes along with the timing of all of this. You know, I've heard people, I've even repeated what people have said about Jesus died on Passover. I tend now to think more that Jesus died the day after Passover. that he did everything the day after the events of the Old Testament Lamb, like he was taking the place. For instance, the Lamb entered the city one day, he came in the city the next. The Lamb was slain at 3 o'clock this day. What time does it say Jesus died? He died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the time the Passover lamb was normally killed. And so everything is setting up for Jesus' crucifixion. So in the evening he comes with the 12, and as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, Verily I say unto you, one of you which eateth with me shall betray me. And they began to be sorrowful, and to say unto him, one by one, is it I, and another, is it I? You know, and every one of the gospel writers adds a little bit to the account. He says, one of you is going to betray me. Well, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? Which one of the 12 is it? Now, you know, your curiosity gets the better of you. If I stood here today and said, one of you is going to go out here and commit murder tomorrow, we'd all be looking at each other. If you believed me, we'd be, Crystal's already pointed it out. So we would all begin to look suspiciously at each other, and then you start thinking, you know, at least they were humble enough to say, well, is it me? Am I the one you're talking about that's going to betray me?